Hi everybody, how are you doing? I hope you're doing well. This is Dr. Goska talking to you from Paterson, New Jersey. My house doesn't look anything like this, but in my dreams it does. I have read all of your exams, every word of every exam, and I want you to be proud of yourself. You showed up, you took the exam, you did your best. I've been reading every word of every one of your papers for the past semester, and I know that every one of you can pass this course. It will just take determination and desire on your part. And if you don't pass the course this semester, you can pass the course next semester. All you have to do is decide that you want it and not let anything get in your way. I know some of you are ADHD or dyslexic, and guess what? I'm ADHD and dyslexic myself, and I got a PhD from one of the best universities in the country. So if I can do it, you can do it too. What we're going to do in this slideshow is we're going to look at some of your exams and look at some of the comments I made on some of your papers. And what I want you to do is to leave notes. I want you to take notes while you're watching this slideshow, and I want you to leave the notes in the appropriate section of the Blackboard page for our class. So let's get started. And by the way, I'm not going to reveal anybody's name, and I'm going to refer to each student as he, and that's so I don't reveal anybody's gender. So even if a female student wrote the paper, I'll be referring to the student as he. So let's look at our first exam. One of the things I really liked about this exam was that the student did some brainstorming, and he came up with 3 reasons why online education is different from in-person education. And this student listed those 3 reasons, and they were 3 different reasons. They weren't 3 of the same thing. And so this student was ready to support his thesis that online education can never be as good as in-person education. And he was ready because before he started writing, he came up with that list of 3 things. So that's the first thing that this student did right. He's got a great first sentence, and this is his first sentence. With the coronavirus spreading across the United States, many schools are suspending operations and switching to online classes. So he's talking about current events, he's intriguing the reader, and he opens up his paper with that really interesting sentence. Then he says, while canceling on-site schooling is a good thing. Notice that he's starting with a subordinating conjunction, while. So the next clause is a dependent clause, and he needs to put a comma after the end of that clause. Quite a few of you made errors like this, where you started with a subordinating conjunction, and you didn't put a comma after the dependent clause. So when you take your notes for this slideshow, I want you to list for me the subordinating conjunctions. And like I said, if you didn't buy the book, go online and Google subordinating conjunctions and you'll find them all there. So in your notes, I want to see a list of the subordinating conjunctions. If you start with a dependent clause, you have to have a comma after the end of that clause. While canceling on-site schooling is a good thing, comma. There needs to be an alternative to online courses. It would be better to just suspend all operations. Online classes are no substitute for in-person ones. That's a great first paragraph. He's got an opinion. He expresses it clearly. He doesn't have any tangents. This student did a really good job. Then in the second paragraph there, he forgets to put a comma after for starters. For starters is a prepositional phrase. If you start your sentence with a prepositional phrase, you've got to have a comma. So in your notes, I want you to list some prepositions: in, on, under, over, through. And I want you to give me at least one sample sentence that starts with a prepositional phrase and a comma. In the class, comma, under the book, comma, on the table, comma, etc. Then in that second paragraph, he's got an illogical shift. He uses the word a teacher, which is singular, and then he uses a plural pronoun there. And he starts a sentence, At the bottom of that paragraph, he has a but, and he doesn't have a comma before but. If your second clause starts with a coordinating conjunction, you have to have a comma before the coordinating conjunction. Then, on the next page, he's got a parenthetical element in his first paragraph. Another problem occurs when you take into consideration that students, comma, having the internet right in front of them, comma, could be easily distracted. That's a parenthetical element, and he brackets it off with commas. That's excellent. Okay, so I think this student did a pretty good job, and I think he's going to get a pretty good grade. Let's look at the next one. The student begins with brainstorming, which I always recommend before you start writing, do some brainstorming. And this student came up with some topics that he's going to write about. Students get behind in their work. Students don't know how to do time management. Students need to consider what kind of learner they are, etc. On the next page, he starts out, this is his first sentence, and you can see it on your screen there. Are you that student that waits last minute to do your project or homework? Students, I strongly recommend that you read your work out loud before you hand it in. Why? Because you will pick up your own errors. Are you that student that waits last minute to do your project or homework? He needs to say, are you that student that waits until the last minute to do your project or homework? There are some words missing there, so this student did not read his work out loud before handing it in. And then his sentence is, when choosing an online class or non-online class is important. I bet if this student had read that sentence out loud, he would have discovered that it doesn't work. When choosing an online class or non-online class is important. The syntax is wrong. Syntax means the way you put words together. So you've got to read your sentences out loud, and then you'll figure out when the syntax is wrong. And what he's trying to say is an online class or a non-online class is an important choice. Go further down in that first paragraph, and he's got a coordinating conjunction, one of the fanboys, or, and he doesn't have a comma before it. So what I want you to do right now in your notes is I want you to write down the fanboys. And you know what the fanboys are, and if you don't know what the fanboys are, Google it. Fanboys are the coordinating conjunctions, and I want you to list them. There's 7 of them. And I want you to tell me the rule. And I'll tell you right now what the rule is. If you're joining 2 clauses with a coordinating conjunction, you put a comma before the fanboy. Okay, then let's go down about 3 lines in the second paragraph. If, that's a subordinating conjunction. If you wait until the last minute to do all your work, comma, you might not finish all your work in time. And then in a couple of spots, he doesn't put an apostrophe in the word don't, D-O-N apostrophe T. And if, again, a little bit further down in that second paragraph, if you don't manage your time right, comma, because it's a subordinating conjunction, it's a dependent clause. If you begin your sentence with a dependent clause, you must have a comma. And I want you to write that rule down in your notes right now, your notes that you're going to show me. Okay, let's go down in your page. Know when they're trying to respond. I'm at the top of the page there. They could be busy that day and not check their email, which might cause them to fail. So what we've got there is an illogical shift. Remember illogical shifts? It's something we talked about right before the exam. An illogical shift is when you start a sentence with they, as this student did at the top of the page there. It starts with they, and then he changes to you. If you're writing about students, talk about students. Don't change over to you. It's not about me. At the beginning of the second paragraph, he's got some words that don't make sense, so I crossed them out. You could be the hands-on type, And you'll notice that I put, like, look in the middle of the page, you notice that I put a little dash. That's called a hyphen. And hands-on is a two-word adjective, and you need to put a hyphen between two-word adjectives. So online learning, well, that's actually just one word, but hands-on, hands hyphen on, face-to-face, face hyphen to hyphen face. Okay, and then we have a participial phrase. We talked about those in class, and that is in the second paragraph on the page. You can see taking an online class. That's a participial phrase. It starts with a gerund. Taking, that's a gerund. And if you begin a sentence with a participial phrase, you put a comma after it. So I want you to write that down right now. That's one of the rules. In your notes, please write down. If you begin a sentence with a participial phrase like taking an online class, going to the movies, swimming on the lake, setting the table, those are all participial phrases, and I want you to come up with your own participial phrase. Smoking a joint, punching my friend. If you begin a sentence with one of those, you have to put a comma after it, so please write that down. And my other criticism for this particular exam is that it was pretty short. Okay, let's start looking at the next one. You start a sentence with a preposition in 2020. You start a sentence with a preposition, you have to put a comma after the preposition. Let's move on to the next page. Intuition is not only a great trait to have. Why does the student put a comma after trait? There's no rule for that. Don't just start sprinkling commas throughout your paper without any rule. What is the rule? Go down 5 lines. In an online class. That's a prepositional phrase. If you start a sentence with a prepositional phrase, prepositions in, on, under, over, through, during. Prepositional phrase in a box, on the table, during the movie. If you start a sentence with a prepositional phrase, you must put a comma after the prepositional phrase. And can you do me a favor right now, even if you've done it already, and write a prepositional phrase and then write a comma and then give me a sentence. During the movie, comma, I fell asleep. In my class, comma, there is a spider. In the book, comma, there is a beautiful scene. Give me a sentence with a prepositional phrase in your notes. And go down to the middle of the page there. If you don't have intuition, if, subordinating conjunction, dependent clause, it needs a comma. The student has a lot of interesting things to say, but the student, excuse me, is making errors in things that we've talked about in class. Okay. You notice I don't have too many comments on that next page. I really like the first sentence. It's not the canvas. It's how the painter uses his canvas with every stroke. So the student is engaging in some beautiful artistic language, which is always welcome. Please do that in your papers. And then he says, as a student, you don't have to introduce yourself into the essay. You can just state what you want to state. Excuse me again. It requires an apostrophe. And overall, this was a pretty good exam, and I think the student is going to do well. Okay, here's the next paper. This student didn't begin with a rough draft, but I did not photograph the rough draft, so you don't see the rough draft. You'll see I have a comment in the upper right-hand corner. Don't begin a sentence with a conjunction. That's a rule I'm giving you, my students. When you go out into the world, you'll notice that other people do begin sentences with conjunctions. That's fine for them. That's fine for their situation. But for the purposes of the class that we're taking and for the purposes of academic writing, please don't begin sentences with the fanboys. Don't begin sentences with and. Don't begin sentences with but. Don't begin sentences with yet. So can you write that down in your notes right now? That I don't want you to begin sentences with coordinating conjunctions. And those are the fanboys, once again. So the word but there, I crossed it out. He doesn't need it, and it's not a good way to start the sentence. And just begin the sentence with, I think that it depends from person to person. Also, don't begin a sentence with because. Just cross that out. Like some people love to eat vegetables. Let's go down to like a little bit above the middle of the page there. It says some people love to eat vegetables while some don't eat it. So you notice over on the right-hand side in the middle of the page, he uses the word vegetables and then he uses the word it. Vegetables is plural, it is singular. That's an illogical shift. So can you do me a favor and write that in your notes right now? An illogical shift is when you have a plural noun and you use a singular pronoun. So the proper pronoun for vegetables would be them, not it, because them is plural. Okay, let's talk about, okay, the student keeps putting quotation marks around can online education be the very best? The quotation marks are not necessary. I mean, I didn't delete any points, but it's really not necessary. Okay, and talking about hyphens again, hyphens in multi-word adjectives before nouns. Stay at home, like a stay-at-home mom. Stay at home is an adjective. It's a word describing the mom. It's 3 words, so you put hyphens in between. Stay hyphen at hyphen home. Stay at home mom. Once again, you'll notice in the upper right-hand corner, I'm telling him not to use quotation marks because he's not really quoting anyone. And let's go on to the next page. I'm asking him not to begin a sentence with therefore. Just delete it. Therefore is, and again, you're going to find people beginning sentences with therefore outside of our class, but for the purposes of our class, I'm asking you don't begin sentences with therefore. Use therefore in the middle of the sentence. For example, I like sports, therefore I subscribe to Sports Illustrated magazine. I'm a good student, therefore I get straight A's. So therefore, for our class, use it in the middle of sentences, not in the beginning of sentences. So can you please write that down in your notes right now, that I don't want you to begin sentences with therefore. The next thing I'm circling there is the word it. What does the student mean by the word it? I don't know. He's not telling me. So be careful when you use the word it. Rather than using the word it, why don't you just give me the noun that you're talking about? And I don't know what noun he's talking about. Is he talking about online education? Is he talking about student preparation? Is he talking about the choice between one kind of an education and another? I don't know, because he's not telling me. But otherwise, the student did a pretty good job, and he's going to get a good grade. Okay, here's a student who has some really great brainstorming. Before he started writing his essay, he divided his points between pros and cons. Pros means a point that supports what you're the argument you're making, and con is something that detracts from the argument you're making. So you notice he has 2 lists. Why is online education good? Because everything is online now, because it gives the students more times to have jobs, because students can look things up at home. Why is online not such a good idea? Because the students miss physical interaction with their teacher, because online things can be confusing, and because students are more likely to cheat. So this student did a fabulous job of brainstorming, and I really commend that. So let's have a look at the first page of his essay. You notice that I cross out, have a look at his 3rd line. I'm crossing out every place where he's saying, I believe, I think, I feel. So what I want you to do right now in your notes is please write down in an academic essay where you're arguing a point. Don't say, I believe, I think, I feel, because you're saying what you, I mean, I know that it's what you think is true, otherwise you wouldn't really be writing it. So he's got a really strong thesis statement right at the top of the paragraph. Online education can never be the very best sort of education. Okay, Strong thesis, very strongly worded. I would just delete all that stuff where he's saying that he's giving his own opinion. And then in this first paragraph, he gives a bunch of reasons to support his main point, which is an excellent thing to do in a college essay. In your first paragraph, you give all the reasons that you're going to talk about. So he says college is a time where people are kind of socializing with each other. If students are at home, they're more likely to cheat, and students don't form bonds with teachers. So this is a great example. I hope you read this paragraph, because this is a great example of a student giving a really strong first paragraph that lists 1, 2, 3 reasons to support his main point. So what I want you to do in your notes right now is please write down that this paper is a good example of a first paragraph that lists 3 reasons to support the main point. And here you see his first paragraph. He's starting with how colleges are places where people learn and grow by interacting with each other. You'll see that I crossed out his rhetorical question, and please write this in your notes right now, that I don't want you to use rhetorical questions in your essay. And you'll notice that I added a comma, like look about 75% of the way down the page, over toward the right-hand side. He's got one of the fanboys, but, and he doesn't use a comma before but, so I inserted that comma. Then the next paragraph, he talks about how students might cheat. And you'll notice if you look about 25% of the way down the page, on the sort of left-hand side, the student misspells the word there. It's T-H-E-R-E. And then he talks, in his final paragraph, he talks about how students in online classes are unable to bond with their professors. This is a very powerful paper. This is a super duper paper. I give this paper an A. So if you want to see what an A paper looks like, please read this paper. And this is the final page of that really excellent essay. Okay, let's look at the next paper. The problem with this paper is a problem called garbled syntax. Garbled means mixed up. Syntax means the order that words appear in. So what I am saying to this student is that this student is not properly putting words together to make a sentence. So what do you do if your problem is garbled syntax? There are 2 things you can do, and here are the 2 things you can do. And please put this in your notes. The first thing you can do is you can read your work out loud. If you read your work out loud, you will get an idea of where your errors are. The second thing you can do is stick to simple sentences. Noun, verb, noun. If you don't know how to make complex sentences grammatically correctly, then don't even try. Just write short, simple sentences. Have a look at the first sentence of this student's paper. Online education is one of those things you would think is very convenient, but comes with just as many cons as pros. That's garbled syntax. What is the word were doing in this sentence? Who knows? The student just threw it in there. Also, the student should just put a period when he's finished his sentence. Online education is one of those things you would think is very convenient. Period. You have a sentence. Stop. Begin the next sentence. Don't keep trying to put like every word that you want to say in one sentence. Then begin again with the words online education. Online education comes with just as many cons as pros. Period. You've got a sentence. Finish it. For example, comma. For example is a prepositional phrase. If you begin a sentence with a prepositional phrase, you must follow it with a comma. Delete the word with. The coronavirus is spreading rapidly. Period. You have a sentence. Finish. Finish the sentence. Stop trying to make long sentences. To the student whose paper this is, you have trouble making long sentences, make your sentences short. Down the bottom of the page, you'll see that we need a comma before the fanboy. And let's get to the next page. He's a little bit vague. He says a good amount of students. How many students? He's got an illogical shift. Possibly students. And then he says most students. I want to know how many students. And he says there is students. That's the illogical shift. There is students. Students is plural. Is singular. Logical shift. Then he begins a paragraph with the word furthermore. Not a good idea to begin paragraphs with the word furthermore. Furthermore belongs in the middle of sentences. I like sports. Furthermore, I love rugby. Okay, let's look at the next page. While for other students, let's look at like the middle or the 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down. While for other students possibly fail the class because they were careless and didn't really do work on the classes online. Garbled syntax. Some students are careless, period. They don't do the work, period. Stop trying to put every word you know inside your head into one sentence. So the problem there was garbled syntax. Okay, let's look at the next paper. The student starts out with some brainstorming, good idea. Let's look at the next page. Okay, on the other hand, that is a prepositional phrase. You're starting a sentence with a prepositional phrase. On, that's a preposition. The other hand, comma. People think it harder and confusing. What? What is harder and confusing? You're using the word it, but what do we mean by it? Tell me what you think is hard and confusing, and give me a verb. People think it harder and confusing. People think it is harder and confusing. So in your notes, please write down, if you're using the word it, make sure the person who's reading your paper knows what you mean by the word it. Just use a noun. People think online education is harder. People think computers are harder. People think email is harder. I mean, tell me what it is you think is hard. Okay, I'm going to go down to the first sentence of the next paragraph. Students thinking about tutoring online classes can be good and bad. I don't know what that means. That's totally unclear. Students thinking about taking online classes can be good and bad. This is another problem with a lack of clarity. What I want you to do, the student who wrote this paper, is please reread your work before you hand it in. And focus on writing short, simple, noun, verb, noun sentences. And I said it's short. This paper is very brief, as you can see, compared to the other papers. And there's really no organization. Compare this paper to the other paper that had the outline, the pros and the cons. This is just a bunch of sentences thrown together without any organization. So I want this student to consider going to tutoring. Let's look at the next paper. Okay. Let me read the first paragraph of this paper. Is online education the best sort for a student? Online education is a way for someone to get a GAD or college credit. Online education is limited to variety resources, but unlike a school, colleges, provides teachers, tutoring sessions, time, and peers to talk about school-related class. Is that clear? I don't really know what the student means by this paragraph, so I want the student to think about that writing is a way to communicate your ideas to other people. Is this first paragraph really communicating your ideas to an audience. Think about that. Approach someone in a shopping mall and read them this paragraph and then ask them if they understand. I have a lot of comments on this paper, and I'm not going to go through every one, but I'm going to say that there's a lot of problems with clarity. Like, I really genuinely don't know what this student is talking about in a lot of places. Teachers are aware, and I'm reading from the top of the page here, teachers are aware when students are struggling with a particular element or topic so they can backtrack what they learn before or help explain what is being taught. If that doesn't work, a teacher can recommend the student for tutoring session. Online education cannot provide that attention or arrangement for that student. In fact, this can be damaging for the online student because of the lack of communication. Online education can't always provide a teacher to chat with, so the student is to struggle by him or herself. I have an idea what the student is talking about, but on the basic sentence level, like when I read this paper, I just felt really confused. I found it hard to understand. So I want to invite the student to think about writing shorter, simpler sentences and just really thinking about what is my point here. And you don't do that in the rough draft, you do that in the final draft. So for this student, I really strongly want to recommend tutoring. Okay, let's look at the next one. Let's see. The first sentence of this one is, the year is 2020. The world has come a long way since Dungeons and Dragons. I thought this was a really intriguing first sentence. So this student is obviously thinking and wanting to say interesting things, and that's good. I would focus a little bit on spelling because the word dungeons is misspelled. There are other like grammatical errors, and if the student is watching, I hope the student is watching, I hope that you will look at your page here and have a look at some of the grammatical errors that I'm hoping that you will think about fixing. On the final page, I said that the tone is a little bit too casual for an academic essay, like it ends with the sentence, a big fat no. And that's something you could say to your friend, but it's not really something you say in an academic essay. The language use is very interesting, and I hope that you continue to do that. I hope that you continue to use language in an interesting way. But you're skimping on solid points. Like, what are the solid reasons that online education is either good or bad? Okay, let's have a look at the next one. I wouldn't start, this student starts with Professor Goska. Professor Goska gave the class an article called The Trouble with Online Education. That has nothing to do with it. The question is online education good or bad? Is it education of the best sort or not? So don't start with me, because I'm totally not important for the point. Start with reasons that online education is good or reasons that online education is bad. I'm seeing a lot of punctuation errors. I'm seeing the word while, which is a subordinating conjunction used to begin a clause and then no comma. I'm seeing an illogical shift. We've got points, that's plural. We've got a verb is, that's singular. I'm seeing a tangent. Let's see. Currently, students take online education in a whole range of subjects. That's the beginning of the second paragraph. That's a tangent. It has nothing to do with whether or not online education is good or bad. Semicolons are misused throughout this paper. Another issue for this paper is there's a lack of organization. Things are unconnected. Sentences are just thrown in randomly. So I really want this student to consider tutoring. I know the student is a very talented student, has a lot of basic talent in writing, but needs to work on syntax, punctuation, and organization. So if you are this student, The three things you need to work on are basic punctuation, syntax, and organization. I apologize for the blurry quality of this one. This is a pretty good paper. Let's see, what can I focus on here? We have more of the problems with the clauses that begin with subordinating conjunctions, but we've already talked about that, so I won't hammer away at that. Missing hyphens, face to face, face hyphen to hyphen face. There's redundancies where the student is repeating himself. A missing transition at the beginning of the second paragraph. But overall, this is a pretty good paper, and it certainly will pass. Okay, let's look at the next one. This one, if you are this student, I can say that your paper had few errors, but it didn't have a lot of substance. You didn't come up with the reasons, the hard, concrete reasons why online education is either valuable or not valuable. Okay, we just have a couple more to go, so please bear with me. And yeah, we just have 2 more to go, so stick with me, please. Some things students should think about before taking online classes are how good their work ethic is, how much time they have to do their work, and if they would have distractions or not to do the work. This is an okay first paragraph. We've got 3 things, bang, bang, bang. We've got think about your work ethic, think about the amount of time you have, and think about how distracted you'll be. It's a workman-like first paragraph. Workman-like means you got the job done. There's nothing pretty, there's nothing elaborate, but you did get the job done. And then once again, the second paragraph begins with a subordinating conjunction and a dependent clause, and there's no comma. So everybody in your notes, please list, I know I've told you this already, but I'm telling you this again, please list all the subordinating conjunctions, and please tell me that you know that when there's a subordinating conjunction at the beginning of the dependent clause, at the beginning of a sentence, it's followed by a comma. And our student misspelled the word too quiet, T-O-O, too loud, T-O-O, misspelled certain. Please get yourself a dictionary. There are some sentences that are unclear on the next page. That's why you can see in the upper right hand corner I wrote the word unclear. In that second paragraph, and I'm sorry that this photo is so blurry, this is the first time I've ever done this, taken photographs of student papers. The student keeps switching back between the student and you. That's an illogical shift. Stick with student. Don't start using you. Students do this, students do that. Don't say you do this, you do that. Okay, that final paragraph towards the bottom of the page there, the first sentence begins with really bad syntax. Then there's the whole, do I have distractions that keep me from my work? No, that's not a sentence. Come on, you can do better than that. This is what you want to say. Students should ask themselves, are they easily distracted that will keep them from their work? And the bottom paragraph on the next page, we have an illogical shift between you and there. And as I promised, we've got just 1 more to go, and I apologize for the blurry quality. Can a computer replace a teacher? In general, I ask that you avoid rhetorical questions, but that is a good question, and I think it's an okay way to begin this paragraph. And then we have a bunch of misspellings which detract from the work. First off, I am a student at County College of Morris, comma, I have been learning in school for over 10 years now. That's a comma splice, my friend. I am a student at CCM, comma, I have been learning in school for over 10 years now. Comma splice. You have 2 independent clauses. And what I want you to do in your notes is I want you to tell me 3 ways to fix a comma splice. We went over it in class. What are the 3 ways to fix a comma splice? And if you don't have your notes, Google it. How do you fix a comma splice? So in your notes, tell me 3 ways to fix a comma splice. On the next page, the student uses the word a lot. Avoid a lot in academic writing. Use much or many. Much is happening in the world today. Well, that's kind of a vague sentence. You're not really saying anything. We have some unclear sentences. We have a logical shift in the middle of that second paragraph. To someone, they, someone is one person. They is a plural pronoun. And I've told this student again towards the bottom of that page, avoid rhetorical questions. Let's see. What do I want to draw attention to? Here's the last page. I say that the paper is disorganized, but you know, this is, I think this is a passing grade. Okay, so that's it for now, and you're going to have some other assignments to do other than watching this video and taking notes on it, and please take a look at announcements to find those assignments, and thank you very much for listening.